Uncle Dan.
Hey, Uncle Doug, how are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
You know.
Well,
I'll take that as a win.
Yeah,
Yeah, sure.
just the fact that I answer the phone is a big deal.
Yeah.
I'd like to think that each of us brings something to this show. Our own speciality.
Sure.
And
sure.
Uncle Mark tends to be the keeper of lost things, lost land masses, lost continent. You might call him incontinent.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly.
It's true. I'm like Frank Langella in The Finder of Lost Loves. Do you remember that terrible show that was like one season in like 1980 or 1992 or something? Hilarious.
No. Nobody remembers
Nobody
that.
remembers it.
You're
Maybe
the
I-
only
maybe
human being on the earth that remembers that.
Maybe
Or
I'm
Frank
dreaming.
And
Langella.
Frank Langella.
Oh, come on. Who doesn't like Frank Langella? But yeah, he was the finder of lost loves. I am the finder of lost things, including continents. So let's dive right in. You know, fellas, since we as a nation are about to feed millions of our children to the empty orange Moloch for no discernible reason by making them return to school, and since unmarked fascist shock troops are now kidnapping people unopposed in Portland, and since HBO didn't renew Watchmen for a second season...
Wait, are you kidding me?
No, they didn't fucking renew Watchmen. Like one of the best television shows ever made.
I quit America. That's it. I quit.
I know.
That's it. That's all I can stand. I can't stand no more.
Yep. There was a camel's back and it got broke.
It just straight broke. That was the straw. I know. That is just criminal. So, I know. Well, while you guys are in mourning, I was going to say I thought I'd do something silly and superfluous and light rather than add to the yawning sense of dread that has replaced baseball as the national pastime. But without realizing the fraught path I was heading down, I fucked up. And the silly thing I was doing turns out to be a bit of a fucking nightmare. So let's laugh through the tears and cry through the laughter together in this moment of triumphant stupidity and needless death. So, as we all know, all sorts of dumb or silly or provably wrong ideas come to us from ancient times, despite the insistence, as Dan demonstrated in his discussion on Ayurveda, that because the wisdom is ancient, it is also more better. This is, not true. Ancient stuff can be mind-blowing and incredibly cool, like pyramids and stuff, but it's seldom better than our current knowledge of the natural world and our understanding of our own brains.
Yeah, our pyramids are made of glass and you get to gamble in them.
Yeah, it's so much better. Ask the Mayans, who, while fucking amazing, got a whole bunch of white people to shit their capris over the world ending in 2012 while failing to augur their own ending. Yeah. Or a mistranslation causing the world's greatest minds to think a girl who'd never had intercourse could give birth to a Jewish demigod, causing bizarre and destructive obsession with, quote, virginity and, quote, purity that haunts us to this day. Even a very stupid story that contradicts another one just before it on the very same page has educated human beings to this day believing men have an odd number of ribs and women have an even number, and they're shocked to find out it's not true in their first year of medical school. Right. True story. Do you know that happens a lot? Like
it does.
First year med students like, wait, what? So when olden-timey people didn't know the why or how of a thing, they made something up. Maybe they had some scraps of info or what they felt were good reasons, but basically they just made shit up. And
just like we do on this show.
All day.
Pretty much.
And that's so with today's subject, something the Greeks pulled out of their beautifully sculpted behinds since at least 450 BCE, that being Hyperborea.
Oh.
All right.
Hyperborea falls
I think that's what I had in elementary school.
I was always hyperbored.
Is that why you guys were taking Ritalin?
Yes.
Hyperborea falls into the same category as a couple of things we've talked about on the show before, those being terrae incognitae, regions yet to be mapped or understood, or for our purposes fabled or made up lands. We've discussed Atlantis, what I call Wakanda for white people.
White
Conda. More than once on the show, though we still haven't done a dedicated segment to it. And we've discussed my favorite terrae incognitae, Lemuria, in episode 102, the long skinny continent that, according to various loonies, stretched from Madagascar across the Indian Ocean to India, and then east all the way across the Pacific to touch on coastal Washington state. So that's probably a true thing. Listen to our segment on Ramtha and his boozy lady friend Jay-Z Knight in episode 15 for that hilarity. It is super funny. And while there are tons of other terrae incognitae in lore and legend across the world's cultures, these three, Atlantis, Lemuria, and Hyperborea, still have relevance even today in some of the silliest and unfortunately ugliest corners of quasi-religious, occultist, and even political thought. It's seriously depressing. So the ancient Greek writer Herodotus mentions a place where mysterious, very pale, very tall people live far from the warm Mediterranean. And he called that place Hyperborea, meaning a place beyond the north wind, as personified by the wind god of the north wind, Boreas. So hyper, beyond, Boreas, Hyperborea. Right. Who Herodotus believed lived around Thrace, which is where modern Bulgaria is, so somewhere north of there apparently, maybe in modern Romania. Hard to say. Now, I'm not sure that how much commingling there was between whatever tall white people lived beyond the mountains and the coastal Greeks, but this idea bubbled up a couple centuries before Alexander spread his tzatziki all over the place in the, quote, known world, conquering all sorts of distant lands and peoples. But it's likely there was either direct contact or stories carried by travelers, maybe. So the Greeks just made up the name of the place and the people. They filled in the blanks. After that, they filled in the blanks rather ludicrously. As time wore on, it was said that the Hyperboreans were 10 feet tall, lived 1,000 years, were always happy, and the sun was up 24 hours a day. Which, having been to Iceland, that's only happy for so long before you start losing your fucking mind. So there are some tantalizing clues here. It's basically impossible that any Greek had reached the North Pole in the 5th century BCE, but it is possible that someone they had come in contact with had been to the extreme north of Europe, where the sun can be up for more than 20 hours a day in summer.
Sure.
So the Greek thinkers and writers whose work on the subject survives could never agree on exactly where in the distant world they knew almost nothing about Hyperborea was, except that it was somewhere north and that the people were very white. This will matter more than any of us would like it to in a bit.
Oh, boy.
I had about 16 sources on this segment, but I do want to specifically credit YouTuber Huntress X Thompson for the she did a great piece on this for her extremely info-heavy discussion on this topic. So, the Greeks bequeathed us their mythology and gods, but eventually moved on from them themselves, including the silliness of Hyperborea and its happy 1,000-year-old white people. But the ideas didn't disappear. As Europe industrialized and later colonized, some people there felt both alienated by the failures of conservative Western religion and society to address the pressures and alienation of modernity. Some of those people began to consume the exotic ideas and customs that flowed into the imperial capitals from their new colonial possessions, mostly from the East, in India, Egypt, Persia, China, etc.
Yeah.
This is an idea that the word for this kind of idea and study at the time was coined as Orientalism. This was the Western esoteric mystical movement. Basically a ton of generally upper-class, bored white people sucking up the cool bits of the thinking and cosmology and rituals of various brown people that they also thought of as lesser races. I know, It's kind of weird, but there it is. One such very famous esoteric mystic was Helena Blavatsky, who we talked about a bunch, especially in episode 54. She was among the first to dust off Hyperborea as a real place in the 19th century, and somehow she seanced her way into stating that humanity all derived from 3, quote, root races. That's never going to...
This is going to get good.
Yeah, it never ends well. So there were obviously the Atlanteans, the Lemurians, and the Hyperboreans. The root races were perfect and pure, and only defiled themselves down by copulating with apes and other animals.
Oh God!
But so rather than advancing from lower forms, she thinks we have regressed from higher forms, right?
Right.
Well, not us, not white people, but the white Hyperboreans did not get all beastie, and that's where white people come from. Ha! We got there, guys. Find me one goddamn religious idea that isn't rooted in racism. So,
right, exactly.
To be fair, and I'm not sure that's the right word, to Blavatsky, pretty much everyone in the esoteric movement and spiritualism in Europe was deeply into eugenics, otherwise known as scientific racism, which we discussed in episode 112, and every sort of pseudoscientific race theory and ethnographic balderdash, as they were into crystal balls and funny hats. So she was hardly alone, but it began to take hold that whether just as a symbolic idea or as a literal lost homeland, Hyperborea was the glorious northern home to the vastly superior white race. Blavatsky is considered one of the founders of the movement and philosophy known as esoteric fascism, and she was the first person to use the term Aryan to refer to the earliest known Europeans, the real but little understood Proto-Indo-European people.
Really?
So, yeah, she was the coiner. So Aryans were they actually weren't a race, considered a race. It's a Sanskrit word meaning wise or something like that, and enlightened. So this idea of Hyperborea as the home of the original unpolluted white Ubermenches offered the confused and furious eugenicists and spiritual racists of the early 20th century, struggling to counter Darwinian evolutionary theory, a counter-narrative, one called polygenism, not polygonism, but polygenism, a garbage theory that says that different human races are of totally different origins. So they had a way not to be related to all the dusky races of the earth, and going to bed at night untroubled by dreams of their black African great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother.
Right.
So we just kind of stumbled into compatibility. These
Yes, that were genetically basically identical, came from like three totally different origins, which, sure, that happened.
Okay. Sure.
So what happens when you leave counterfactual white superiority trash like this laying around? Well, in the early 20th century, there were plenty of hands hungry for proof of white superiority, very eager to pick it up, as you can imagine. One such person was René Binet, which is a wonderful name, who later was one of the last of the SS to surrender in Berlin, defending the bunker with a very dead Hitler in it. He is a super important figure in neo-fascist Europe. He coined the term, which I hadn't heard before, from Brest to Vladivostok, meaning the idea to basically create out of nowhere Hyperborea from the coast of France all the way to the Pacific coast of Russia, everything north of that line, right? So, yeah, that's good. Another fine fellow that picked up the polar homeland bullshit and ran all the way to hell with it was Julius Evola, an Italian esoteric hyper-fascist and tremendously evil misogynist, pro-violence anti-Semite whose turgid writings have helped to inspire a whole new generation of European and Russian neo-fascists. In them, he refers to Hyperborea and uses the word boreal as a name for the superior white race, interchangeable with the very in vogue term Aryan. That his name is spelled almost the same as evil can't be too much of a coincidence. and this gets so silly. Another jolly good fellow that wanted to establish permanent residency in the non-existent white continent Hyperborea was a fancy Chilean monster boy called Miguel Joaquin del Carmen Serrano Fernandez, a.k.a. Miguel Serrano. He was an upper-class Chilean Germanophile who was pissed about Chile's neutrality during the Second World War and agitated for support of Hitler's Germany. Already a devotee of the occult, Serrano met a mysterious German immigrant called simply FK, who got him into a combination of astral projection, left-hand black magic, and Kundalini yoga. It's not even, we're not even there yet. And professed that there was a secret group of Aryan adepts hidden in the Himalayas, and they had summoned the spiritual super being Adolf Hitler, who they referred to as, oh boy, I'm going to kill this, Shuddhi-Buddhishvababa, into existence on Earth to prevent the Kali Yuga, the final destructive cycle of all human life on Earth, according to Hinduism, and that FK claimed he could communicate with the Fuhrer on the astral plane. FK
Okay.
and Serrano, yeah.
You need to repeat the last 3 minutes or so because I think I just had a stroke.
Yes. You didn't know there was a Kundalini Yoga Hitler tie-in, did you?
I did
You
not
did not see that coming.
Just know that there's a guy walking around who is Der Astralführer.
Well, I'm just about to demonstrate that. So FK and Serrano were early practitioners of a real movement called esoteric Hitlerism.
Oh, God.
Yeah, that I'm going to do a whole segment about another time. That's the natural heir of Blavatsky's esoteric fascism, and is an ongoing thing that, as I said, we'll discuss later. After the war, FK insisted that Hitler had survived and was living under the ice cap in Antarctica. So Serrano went looking for him.
Fucking
Oh
why
my
not?
God, that's good.
This is all true. And sadly, he both didn't find Hitler and himself survived his journey. But this is even spookier, but did become the Chilean ambassador to India,
Oh my God.
Austria, and
way.
most chillingly, the International Atomic Energy Agency.
Oh my God.
He was very much a believer in the literal Hyperborean super race and the lost northern homeland, and believed until his death in 2009, that the extermination of the Jews was an incomplete mission.
Oh my God.
Well,
Chile,
I mean,
what the
he
fuck?
is right. They did not completely exterminate the Jews, so
Yeah,
I
they
have to give
didn't.
him partial credit on that one.
They didn't quite hit their quota, did they?
I would love to just see the recap of his trip to was it Antarctica or the Arctic?
Well, he wrote a book about it.
Oh, great.
He actually wrote a book. He wrote a book about all of that. And anyway, I've kind of a side note. There's apparently a book that covers a lot of this stuff and a lot of the esoteric Hitlerism that I've ordered called Black Sun. So I'm extremely interested to.
Wow.
You're going to be hearing some more garbage in the future, kids. Sorry about that. In episode 52, we had a good laugh at former Mormon and blue ribbon lunatic Rodney Clough and his hollow earth theory. He took some dumb observations of Edmund Halley, 18th century smart guy that the comet is named after, about the North Pole and a hollow planet, and folded the racist version of Hyperborea onto and into it, claiming a super race of white people who were 10 feet tall and lived 1,000 years, actually lived inside the Earth. And that's where the flying saucers the aliens gave the Nazis ended up at the end of the war, right? So, still following me? I hope not. It's not leading anywhere good. So, Rodney Clough is a clown and a joke and harmless to anyone but himself. But that wackadoo nugget about Nazis, just like some of the actual Nazis I named before, is what jerked my silly little story about Hyperborea from an ancient curiosity to a potential modern atrocity. The writings and beliefs of people like Blavatsky, Evola, Binet, and Serrano have caught on like crazy with modern esoteric neo-fascists worldwide, but most especially in the part of the world that believes itself to be Hyperborea, mostly Russia and Northern Europe. Most are kooks and knuckle draggers, but some are very powerful kooks and knuckle draggers, like Dutch parliamentarian Thierry Baudet, who talks about, who I think is still in office, who talks about wanting to seize and cleanse the boreal world of non-whites. Or Putin confidant Alexander Dugin, who is a big believer in white Russian supremacy and spouts the SS officer Benet's Hyperborean slogan, "From Brest to Vladivostok," menacingly. The European Christianist neo-pagan right is gaining a troubling amount of traction in European politics and is essentially in power in Russia. So from France to Hungary, from Italy to Italy, European white nationalists are very keen on the idea, whether symbolically or more troublingly, literally, that they were born out of a pretend lost continent the Greeks knew too little about the world to have made half a guess at, that is not at the North Pole nor under it, nor on any map, because the idea of sharing common humanity with black people or Jews is too terrifying for them to bear. That is maybe the most stupid thing I've ever had to write about for this show. And I did cryptozoology and David Icke. Yeah. And it's, it's a goddamn dangerous as it is absurd. This is an example of the inherent danger of stupid, irrational, superstitious beliefs. They're kind of like guns, right? Theoretically harmless if left alone, but capable of pretty incalculable damage in the hands of someone with bad intention or malice.
Right.
So
even just stupid.
Oh, just stupid, exactly.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but who was it that originally kind of made up this? Which Greek was it?
Herodotus, and they think that might even have come from that he might have been citing older sources. So
Sure, but
potentially the 7th century BCE.
It doesn't sound like this, to his mind, was a master race. It sounded like they were kind of freakish, right? Like 10-foot tall white ghouls.
Yeah, like monsters.
Kind of happy-go-lucky.
So the Greeks were kind of all over the place with it, and it evolved over a few centuries into, there's tall white people up there somewhere, to they're happy all the time, the sun's always up, it's a land of milk and they thought the North Pole, or that where the North Pole is, was like a land of milk and honey, right? Mm-hmm. So they weren't freaks. They were. It's kind of easy to read them as superior in some way, right? Because of lifespan and life outcomes or whatever. But it's just garbage, right? It's complete garbage, and there are violent extremists who either 100% believe it's true, or just think it's it's like a swastika to them. It's an important symbol of their superiority. So
right. Well, It's too bad Denny's stole the slogan for Hyperborea, right? It's always sunny at Denny's. Got to come up with a new slogan.
That is something I did not look into for this segment, Doug. Thanks. Our Denny's Nazi tie-in. We're going to have to reconsider them as a sponsor at this point, I think.
Moons over Hyperborea. It's
Moons over Berlin.
Oh, it's just it doesn't end, does it? The derp is so dumb and so deep, and then so fucking dangerous. Like, I thought this was, when you mentioned what you were doing earlier this week to me, I'm like, oh, that'll be fun, and now I'm not at all happy.
No, yeah. I was the same
Then you
thing.
ruined our lives, Mark.
I'm like, can I just fucking once find something? It's the racism. There it is.
Yeah,
racism and violent extremism. Found it.
We live our lives in an amusement park, but all of the rides end badly.
And they're all on fire.
All of the rides are missing the last 15 feet of track.
and end in a pile of burning books. So there you go, kids. That's Hyperborea.
Don't believe in it.
Maybe when the European Union lets us back in, we can have a meet up there. So
well, let's toss this one on the tectonic pile, eh?
Exactly. One less continent.
Moving on.